The sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty streets of Copper Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878, as Eleanor Parker hurried down the wooden boardwalk, clutching her wicker basket close to her chest. The sound of laughter, cruel and cutting, drifted from the millinery shop she'd just exited, causing her cheeks to burn hotter than the summer heat. "Did you see that dress she wanted trimmed? Lord knows no amount of lace would help Eleanor find herself a husband." Beatrice Miller's voice carried through the open doorway. "Some women are just too plain to be saved." Eleanor quickened her pace, the words stinging like salt in a fresh wound. At 22, she'd heard it all her life: too tall, too thin, her brown hair too straight, her features unremarkable. Nothing special. Just plain Eleanor Parker, the schoolteacher who would likely never marry. She rounded the corner quickly, desperate to escape the gossip, and collided hard with what felt like a brick wall. Strong hands steadied her as her basket tumbled to the ground, spilling thread spools and fabric scraps onto the dusty street. "Whoa there, miss!" a deep voice rumbled, and Eleanor found herself looking up into the most striking pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Are you all right?" He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and a jawline that could have been carved from granite. His dark blonde hair fell in waves beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and there was kindness in those eyes. Kindness that made Eleanor immediately self-conscious. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, dropping to her knees to gather her belongings. "I wasn't watching where I was going." The stranger crouched beside her, his movements fluid despite his imposing frame. His hands, calloused and strong, gently gathered her scattered possessions. "No harm done, miss," he said, handing her a spool of blue thread. "Name's Yates Walker. Just rode into town yesterday." Eleanor accepted her belongings with trembling hands. "Eleanor Parker. I teach at the schoolhouse." His smile was warm, genuine in a way that made her heart skip. "A schoolteacher? That's mighty respectable work." From the millinery shop, the women emerged, Beatrice and her friends still gossiping loudly. They fell silent when they spotted Eleanor with the handsome stranger, eyebrows raising in surprise and, Eleanor was certain, disbelief. Yates noticed her discomfort, his gaze following hers to the group of women who now whispered behind their gloved hands. "Friends of yours?" he asked, helping Eleanor to her feet. She shook her head, brushing dust from her simple gray skirt. "Not exactly." Beatrice approached, her smile wide and insincere. "Eleanor, we were just talking about you." Her gaze shifted to Yates, suddenly all charm. "And who might this gentleman be?" Before Eleanor could speak, Yates stepped slightly in front of her, almost protectively. "Yates Walker, madam. Just passing through." "Well, Mr. Walker, if you're looking for someone to show you around town, I'd be delighted." "That's mighty kind," he interrupted politely, "but Miss Parker has already offered." He turned to Eleanor, his eyes twinkling. "Isn't that right?" Surprised, Eleanor could only nod, clutching her basket tightly. "Now, if you'll excuse us," Yates continued, offering Eleanor his arm. "I believe we have plans." As they walked away, Eleanor could feel the women's stares boring into her back. Once they were out of earshot, she found her voice again. "You didn't have to do that." Yates slowed his pace to match hers. "Do what?" "Pretend that I offered to show you around. I know someone like you wouldn't—" She stopped herself, embarrassed. "Someone like me?" His voice held genuine curiosity. "Someone so—" She gestured vaguely at him, unable to articulate what she meant. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, you mean someone so dusty and trail-worn wouldn't want to be seen with a lady like yourself?" Eleanor blinked in surprise. That wasn't what she'd meant at all, but before she could correct him, he continued. "Truth is, I've been riding for days. Probably smell like my horse." His easy laugh was warm, infectious. I'd consider it a kindness if you would show me where I might get a decent meal in this town. There was something disarming about his manner, something that made Eleanor relax despite herself. The Prairie Rose serves good food. It's just down the street. Perfect. He gestured forward. Lead the way, Miss Parker. As they walked, Eleanor felt the stares of townsfolk following them. Yates Walker cut an impressive figure, towering beside her in his worn leather vest and faded blue shirt, gun belt slung low on his hips. She'd never walked beside a man who commanded such attention, and she'd certainly never been the subject of such curious glances. At the Prairie Rose, Yates held the door for her, and Eleanor hesitated. I should really get back to preparing for tomorrow's lessons, she said, though part of her, a part she scarcely recognized, wanted desperately to stay. Just one meal? He said, his smile gentle but persuasive. Consider it my thanks for saving me from the clutches of your not exactly friends back there. Eleanor couldn't help but smile. I believe it was I who was rescued, Mr. Walker. Yates, he corrected. And I find that hard to believe. A woman who shapes young minds must be quite capable of handling a few gossips. His perception startled her. You noticed. Hard not to. His expression grew serious. People can be cruel without cause. Something in his tone suggested personal experience, and Eleanor felt a sudden kinship with this stranger. One meal, she agreed, stepping into the dim interior of the restaurant. They settled at a corner table, and Eleanor was acutely aware of the glances and whispers from the other diners. Yates, however, seemed oblivious, his focus entirely on her as he asked about her teaching and her life in Copper Creek. Born and raised here, she explained as they ate their stew and cornbread. My father was the doctor until he passed 3 years ago. I'm sorry to hear that, Yates said, genuine sympathy in his voice. Thank you. My mother went when I was just 12, so it's been quiet since then. She stirred her stew absently. The teaching position opened up right after Father died, and it seemed like Providence. And you enjoy it? Teaching? Eleanor's face brightened. I do. The children are wonderful, most of them, anyway. They haven't yet learned to judge people by appearances or status. Yates studied her thoughtfully. A valuable lesson. What about you? Eleanor asked, eager to shift attention away from herself. What brings you to Copper Creek? Looking for work, he answered, breaking off a piece of cornbread. I've been moving cattle for the past few years, but I'm hoping to find something more permanent. You're a cowboy, then? He nodded. Started young. My pa had a small spread in Texas, but we lost it in '67. Been riding for other men ever since. There was a story there, loss, written in the lines around his eyes, despite his relatively young age. Eleanor guessed he couldn't be much more than 30. The Harrington Ranch might be hiring, she offered. Mr. Harrington mentioned needing experienced hands when he brought his boy to school last week. Yates's eyes brightened. That's so? Might be worth looking into. Their conversation flowed easily after that, and Eleanor was surprised to find herself laughing at his stories of life on cattle drives. For a brief, wonderful hour, she forgot about being plain Eleanor Parker and simply enjoyed the company of a man who seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. When they finally stepped back onto the street, the afternoon sun was lowering toward the western mountains. Thank you for the meal and the company, Mr. Yates, Eleanor said, surprised at her own boldness in using his first name. The pleasure was mine, Eleanor, he replied, her name sounding different, special somehow, in his deep voice. I hope I'll see you again before I leave town. I hope so too, she said softly, and meant it. As they parted ways, Eleanor couldn't help glancing back over her shoulder. To her surprise, Yates Walker was doing the same. He tipped his hat to her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, and Eleanor felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The schoolhouse was quiet the next morning as Eleanor arranged primers on the worn desks. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes that danced in the golden beams. She'd slept poorly, her thoughts returning again and again to her unexpected encounter with Yates Walker. The door creaked open, startling her from her reverie. Margaret Thompson, the mayor's wife and head of the school board, swept in with her usual air of authority. "Good morning, Miss Parker," she said crisply. "Mrs. Thompson?" Eleanor greeted her with a polite nod. "Is there something I can help you with?" The older woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "I heard you were seen dining with a strange man yesterday." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. News traveled fast in Copper Creek. "Mr. Walker is new in town. I was simply being hospitable." Mrs. Thompson's disapproval was palpable. "A schoolteacher must maintain a spotless reputation, Miss Parker. Dining alone with strange men does not align with the example we expect you to set for impressionable young minds." The unfairness of it stung. Eleanor had never given the town a moment's cause for concern in her 3 years of teaching. "Mr. Walker is a gentleman looking for work. There was nothing improper about our meeting." "Nevertheless," Mrs. Thompson sniffed, "I would advise more discretion in the future." The school board takes the moral character of our teachers very seriously. Before Eleanor could respond, children began filing into the schoolhouse, saving her from having to defend herself further. Mrs. Thompson departed with a final meaningful look, leaving Eleanor feeling both angry and embarrassed. Throughout the morning lessons, Eleanor struggled to maintain her focus. The arithmetic problems she'd written on the blackboard blurred before her eyes as Mrs. Thompson's warning echoed in her mind. Was her position truly at risk because she'd shared a meal with a man? The injustice of it burned, but Eleanor knew the school board held significant power. As a woman living alone, her options were limited if she lost her teaching position. At noon, she dismissed the children for their lunch break, watching as they scattered into the schoolyard. She remained at her desk, picking at the apple and bread she'd brought, her appetite diminished by the morning's confrontation. A shadow fell across her desk, and Eleanor looked up to find Sally Harrington, one of her oldest students at 12, standing before her. "Miss Parker?" the girl said hesitantly. "Is it true you had dinner with the new cowboy?" Eleanor sighed. "I shared a meal with Mr. Walker. Yes. Why do you ask?" Sally's eyes widened. "Ma says he came to our ranch looking for work this morning. Pa hired him on the spot after he broke our meanest Mustang." The girl leaned in conspiratorially. "Ma says he's the handsomest man she's seen in years." Despite herself, Eleanor smiled. "Your mother should be careful saying such things where your father might hear." Sally giggled. "Oh, Pa knows. He just laughed and said Ma always did have good taste in men." She paused, studying Eleanor's face. "Mr. Walker asked Pa about you." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "He did?" The girl nodded earnestly. "Pa told him you're the best teacher this town's ever had." Then Mr. Walker smiled real big. Sally tilted her head. "Do you like him, Miss Parker?" "That's not an appropriate question, Sally," Eleanor admonished gently, though she could feel her cheeks warming. "Now, back outside with you. Enjoy the sunshine while you can." As the girl skipped away, Eleanor found herself staring out the window, wondering what exactly Yates had asked about her. The thought that he'd mentioned her at all sent a strange, pleasant shiver down her spine. The afternoon dragged by as Eleanor led her students through reading and history lessons. When she finally dismissed class for the day, she found herself lingering, straightening books and wiping the blackboard with meticulous care, as if delaying her walk home might somehow increase the chances of running into a certain cowboy. Foolish, she chided herself. One meal didn't mean anything. Men like Yates Walker, handsome, charming, capable, didn't pursue women like her. Plain women. Unremarkable women. The kind mothers warned their sons about when they said, "She might make a good wife," but wouldn't you rather have someone pretty to look at across the breakfast table for the rest of your life? Eleanor gathered her shawl and books, locking the schoolhouse behind her as the afternoon shadows lengthened. She had just started down the path toward her small cottage on the edge of town when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leaped to her throat as she turned to see Yates Walker astride a magnificent chestnut stallion. His hat was pushed back, revealing hair dampened with sweat, his shirt clinging to broad shoulders. He looked like he'd put in a full day's work, but his smile was as bright as ever when he spotted her. "Miss Parker," he called, dismounting with fluid grace. "I was hoping to catch you." Eleanor clutched her books tighter against her chest, suddenly very aware of her plain gray dress and sensible boots. "Mr. Walker, I hear congratulations are in order. Sally Harrington mentioned you've found employment." He grinned, leading his horse alongside her as she continued walking. "News travels fast in this town. It's both a blessing and a curse," Eleanor agreed, thinking of Mrs. Thompson's morning visit. Yates studied her face. "You look troubled. Has something happened?" His perceptiveness caught her off guard. "Nothing of consequence," she assured him, then hesitated. "Though I should mention that our dining together yesterday has caused some talk." A frown creased his brow. "Talk?" "The school board believes teachers should be above reproach in all aspects of their lives." She kept her eyes fixed ahead. "Dining alone with a man apparently falls short of their expectations." Anger flashed in Yates's eyes. "That's ridiculous. We did nothing wrong." "Perhaps not in your estimation or mine, but small towns have long memories and strict standards, particularly for women who live alone." They walked in silence for a moment, the only sounds the crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the soft snorts of Yates's horse. "I'm sorry if I've caused you trouble," he finally said, his voice low and sincere. Eleanor shook her head. "You have nothing to apologize for. I'm a grown woman capable of making my own decisions." "Still," he persisted, "I wouldn't want to damage your standing in the community." They had reached the fork in the road where the path to Eleanor's cottage branched off from the main street. She stopped, turning to face him fully. "Why were you looking for me?" she asked, suddenly remembering he'd said he was hoping to catch her. Yates shifted, almost looking boyish in his hesitation. "I wanted to ask if you might attend the town social with me on Saturday. Mr. Harrington mentioned it this afternoon." He hurried on before she could respond. "But given what you've just told me, perhaps that wouldn't be wise." Eleanor's pulse quickened. A proper public event like the town social was entirely different from dining alone together. It would be above reproach, even by Mrs. Thompson's standards. And the thought of arriving on Yates Walker's arm made her dizzy with a strange mix of excitement and terror. "The social would be acceptable," she said carefully. "It's a community event after all." Hope brightened his features. "Then you'll accompany me?" Eleanor found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided. "Yes, I'd like that." His smile was radiant. "I'll call for you at 6. Then? 6 would be perfect." She indicated the path to her left. "My cottage is just down that way, the one with the blue door." "I'll find it," he promised, then hesitated. "May I walk you home now?" Eleanor glanced down the path. Her cottage was visible from where they stood, barely 100 yards away. She should refuse, should maintain the proper distance and decorum expected of her. But something in his eyes made her want to extend their time together, if only for a few more minutes. "Yes," she said simply, and was rewarded with another heart-stopping smile. They walked slowly, Yates asking about her day and sharing stories of his first hours at the Harrington Ranch. When they reached her front gate, Eleanor turned to thank him, only to find him looking at her with such intensity that the words died on her lips. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. He shook his head slightly, as if coming back to himself. "Nothing. Just—" He paused, seeming to search for words. I'm glad I bumped into you yesterday, Eleanor Parker. The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache with an emotion she couldn't name. So am I, she admitted softly. Yates tipped his hat, a gesture somehow both courtly and casual. Until Saturday, then. Eleanor watched him ride away, the setting sun gilding his broad shoulders in gold. Only when he disappeared from view did she turn to enter her cottage, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety for Eleanor. By Friday afternoon, the entire town seemed to know that the new cowboy at Harrington's ranch would be escorting the schoolteacher to the social. Eleanor endured knowing looks from her students, thinly veiled warnings from Mrs. Thompson, and even a surprisingly warm endorsement from Mrs. Harrington, who stopped by the schoolhouse to inform Eleanor that Yates Walker was a fine man with a good head on his shoulders. "Don't you mind the gossips?" the rancher's wife had said firmly. "Some people in this town have nothing better to do than stick their noses where they don't belong." Eleanor had thanked her, touched by the unexpected support. But as Saturday dawned, she found herself plagued by doubts. Her wardrobe, practical and modest, offered few options for a social event. The blue dress she'd worn to the last 3 town gatherings seemed suddenly shabby and outdated, its simple lines and lack of adornment a stark reflection of her own plainness. By mid-afternoon, her cottage looked as though a whirlwind had passed through it. Every dress she owned lay spread across her bed, each one examined and discarded as inadequate. In a moment of desperation, she even considered riding out to the Harrington Ranch to cancel, claiming illness anything to avoid the inevitable comparison between herself and the prettier women who would surely flock around Yates Walker once they arrived at the social. A knock at her door startled Eleanor from her fretting. She opened it to find Sophia Jenkins, the seamstress's daughter and one of the few people in town Eleanor considered a true friend. "I thought you might be in a state," Sophia announced, bustling past Eleanor with a wrapped package in her arms. "When I heard about your escort for tonight, I knew you'd be wearing a path in your floorboards." Eleanor couldn't help but smile. "Is there anyone in town who doesn't know my business?" "Not a soul," Sophia replied cheerfully, "but I come bearing gifts, not gossip." She laid the package on the kitchen table and untied the string. "Mother and I have been working on this for your birthday next month, but we agreed the occasion calls for an early presentation." She unfolded the wrapping to reveal a dress of deep emerald green, its bodice adorned with delicate beadwork that caught the afternoon light. Eleanor gasped, reaching out to touch the fine fabric. "Sophia, it's beautiful, but I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," her friend interrupted. "It's yours regardless. Whether you wear it tonight or on your birthday makes no difference to us." Her eyes twinkled. "Though I will say it would be a shame for Mr. Walker to miss seeing you in it." Eleanor lifted the dress carefully, holding it against herself. The color brought warmth to her complexion, the cut more flattering than anything she'd ever owned. "Your mother shouldn't have gone to such trouble," she said softly, overwhelmed by the gift. Sophia waved away her concerns. "Mother loves you like a daughter, you know that. Besides, she enjoyed the challenge. She says making dresses for the usual Copper Creek crowd is about as exciting as sewing flour sacks." She grinned. "Now, let's get you ready. I brought pins for your hair, too." 2 hours later, Eleanor hardly recognized the woman in her small mirror. Sophia had arranged her usually severe hair in soft waves, secured with mother-of-pearl pins that had belonged to Eleanor's mother. The green dress fit perfectly, highlighting her slender waist and lending her skin a glow she'd never noticed before. "There," Sophia said, stepping back to admire her work. "You look beautiful." Eleanor shook her head, unable to reconcile the image before her with her lifelong perception of herself. "I look different," she conceded. Sophia snorted. "You look like yourself, Eleanor. You've always been beautiful. The dress just makes it harder for people to overlook." Before Eleanor could respond, another knock came at the door, firmer this time. Sophia squeezed her hand encouragingly. "That'll be your cowboy. Remember to breathe." Heart racing, Eleanor opened the door to find Yates Walker standing on her porch, hat in hand. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His hair was neatly combed, his white shirt crisp beneath a black vest, his boots polished to a shine. But it was the expression on his face when he saw her that made Eleanor's breath catch. For a long moment he simply stared, blue eyes wide with what could only be described as wonder. "Eleanor," he finally managed, his voice husky. "You look incredible." Behind her, Sophia cleared her throat. "And that's my cue to leave. Have a wonderful evening, you two." She squeezed past them with a knowing smile, calling over her shoulder, "Don't keep her out too late, Mr. Walker." Alone now, Eleanor found herself suddenly shy. "Thank you for coming to get me. I wouldn't have missed it for anything," Yates said, still looking at her as if she'd materialized from a dream. He seemed to collect himself, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The town hall was already bustling when they arrived, lanterns casting a warm glow over the decorated interior. Fiddle music spilled out onto the street, along with the sound of laughter and conversation. Eleanor felt the weight of eyes upon them as they entered, curious, speculative, some openly surprised. Beatrice Miller and her friends huddled near the refreshment table, their whispers barely concealed behind gloved hands. Eleanor steeled herself for their inevitable comments, but Yates's steady presence beside her bolstered her courage. "Would you like some punch?" he asked, seemingly oblivious to the attention they were attracting. "Yes, please." Eleanor nodded, grateful for something to do with her hands. As Yates moved toward the refreshment table, Mary Wilson, the banker's wife, sidled up to Eleanor. My, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Don't you clean up nicely, Eleanor? Almost didn't recognize you without your schoolmarm clothes." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson," Eleanor replied evenly. "You look lovely as well." The woman's gaze drifted to where Yates stood, waiting for their drinks. "He's quite a catch. I'm surprised he's taken an interest in—" She paused, deliberately. "Well, let's just say you're not usually the type to attract such attention." The barb found its mark, but Eleanor refused to show it. "Perhaps you don't know my type as well as you think." Mrs. Chris Wilson's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Yates returned with 2 cups of punch. "Mrs. Wilson," he acknowledged politely, though there was a coolness in his tone that suggested he might have overheard their exchange. "Mr. Walker," she replied, her demeanor instantly transforming to one of charm. "We're all so pleased you've joined our little community. I do hope you'll save a dance for me later." Yates's smile was polite but non-committal. "I'll be occupied with my date for most of the evening, madam, but thank you for the invitation." Mrs. Wilson's smile tightened as she glided away, and Eleanor couldn't suppress a small, satisfied smile of her own. "You heard," she said quietly. Yates nodded, his expression serious. "I did. And I don't understand it." "Don't understand what?" "Why anyone would consider you plain." His directness startled her. "Even before tonight, when I first saw you on that street, there's nothing plain about you, Eleanor." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with such sincerity, such conviction. Before she could formulate a response, the music changed, the fiddle striking up a lively reel. "Dance with me?" Yates asked, setting aside their barely touched punch. Eleanor hesitated. "I'm not very good." His smile was warm, reassuring. "Neither am I. We'll be bad together." Something about the way he said it, as if being together was what mattered. Not how they looked, gave Eleanor courage. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. The music swept them up. And Eleanor soon found herself laughing as Yates twirled her with more enthusiasm than skill. He was right. He wasn't a particularly graceful dancer, but his joy was infectious. For the first time in her life, Eleanor didn't care who was watching or what they might be saying. In Yates's arms, moving to the lively music, she felt truly free. They danced 3 songs in a row, stopping only when both were breathless and flushed. Yates led her to a quieter corner where chairs had been arranged for those needing rest. "You lied," Eleanor accused playfully as they sat. "You said you weren't good at dancing." Yates laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I never claimed to be a bad dancer, just not a very good one." "A distinction without a difference, Mr. Walker." "Back to Mr. Walker, are we?" His eyes twinkled. "And here I thought we'd progressed past formalities." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. There was something exhilarating about this easy banter, this connection that seemed to have sprung up overnight. "Yates," she corrected softly. His expression gentled, and for a moment, Eleanor thought he might say something more. Instead, he rose and offered his hand again. "Another dance?" The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and conversation. They danced until Eleanor's feet ached pleasantly, shared stories over plates of Mrs. Jenkins's famous apple pie, and somehow managed to avoid any further confrontations with the town gossips. As the night drew to a close, Yates collected Eleanor's shawl and bid farewell to the Harringtons and a few others he'd met during the week. The night air was cool as they stepped outside, the streets quiet except for the muffled sounds of the social continuing behind them. "May I walk you home?" Yates asked, offering his arm once more. Eleanor nodded, suddenly aware that their magical evening was coming to an end. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager to reach their destination. The moon was high and full, bathing the dirt road in silver light. "I had a wonderful time," Eleanor said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "So did I," Yates replied. "Best night I've had in a long while." They reached her gate all too soon. Eleanor turned to face him, reluctant to say goodnight. "Thank you for asking me to accompany you." Yates studied her face in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "Eleanor," he began, then hesitated. "I know we've only just met, but I'd like to see you again. Not just at social events." Her heart raced at his words. "I'd like that too." "Tomorrow?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. "I have the day off. Perhaps we could go for a ride, if you're comfortable on horseback?" Eleanor nodded, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I grew up riding. Father insisted I learn for house calls in bad weather." "Good," Yates said, looking relieved. "I'll come for you around noon, if that suits." "It suits perfectly." He took her hand then, his touch gentle as he raised it to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it sent a shiver of delight through Eleanor's entire body. "Good night, Eleanor Parker," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "Good night, Yates Walker," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually fading into the darkness. Only when he had disappeared from sight did Eleanor enter her cottage, closing the door behind her and leaning against it, her heart full to bursting with emotions she scarcely dared name. The week that followed was unlike any Eleanor had ever known. True to his word, Yates arrived at noon on Sunday with 2 horses, his own chestnut stallion and a gentle mare borrowed from the Harrington stable. They rode into the foothills west of town, where wildflowers carpeted the meadows and aspen trees rustled in the gentle breeze. Yates had packed a picnic, surprising Eleanor with his thoughtfulness. They spread a blanket beneath a towering pine and shared bread, cheese, and apples, talking easily about everything and nothing. Eleanor found herself revealing things she'd never told anyone, her dreams of someday writing children's books, her loneliness after her father's death, her secret frustration with the constraints placed upon her as a woman in a small town. Yates, in turn, spoke of his own losses, his mother's death when he was just 14, the family ranch foreclosed upon after the war, his years of drifting from job to job. There was a restlessness in him, Eleanor sensed, a searching for something he couldn't quite name. "I've never stayed in one place more than a season or two," he admitted, as they watched clouds drift overhead. "Always figured the next town might hold whatever I was looking for." "And has Copper Creek?" Eleanor asked, almost afraid of his answer. Yates turned to look at her, his expression soft. "It's beginning to seem that way." The days that followed settled into a pattern. Yates would work at the Harrington Ranch from dawn until late afternoon, then ride into town to see Eleanor. Sometimes they would simply walk together. Other times they might share a meal at the Prairie Rose or sit on her porch swing, talking until the stars emerged in the darkening sky. On Wednesday evening, he brought her a book, a collection of poetry he'd found at the general store. "The shopkeeper said you'd had your eye on it," he explained, almost shy as he handed her the package. Eleanor had been saving for weeks to purchase that very volume. The fact that he'd noticed, that he'd cared enough to bring it to her, left her momentarily speechless. "You don't like it?" he asked, misinterpreting her silence. "No, I mean yes. I love it," she hurried to assure him. No one has ever given me such a thoughtful gift." His smile in response was worth every moment of the town's increased scrutiny. For Eleanor's blossoming relationship with Yates Walker had become Copper Creek's favorite topic of conversation. She heard the whispers as she walked to school, caught the sidelong glances during Sunday services, endured the pointed comments from Mrs. Thompson and her circle. "I simply can't understand what he sees in her," Eleanor overheard Beatrice Miller say to Mrs. Wilson outside the Mercantile. "She's so ordinary." "Men sometimes go through phases," Mrs. Wilson replied knowingly. "My Henry once courted the plainest girl in his hometown before coming to his senses and marrying me. Mr. Walker will move on once the novelty wears off." The words stung, reinforcing doubts that crept into Eleanor's mind during quiet moments. What did Yates see in her? Would he wake up one morning and realize he'd been somehow mistaken, that she truly was as unremarkable as everyone had always believed? By Friday evening, Eleanor's spirits had fallen into a melancholy that even Yates's arrival couldn't fully dispel. They sat on her porch swing, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold. Eleanor was uncharacteristically quiet, responding to Yates's stories with only the occasional nod or murmured acknowledgement. Finally, he gently took her hand. "Something's troubling you." It wasn't a question, and Eleanor didn't bother denying it. "I overheard some things in town today." Yates's jaw tightened. "More gossip?" She nodded, staring down at their intertwined fingers. "They can't understand why you're spending time with me. They think—" Her voice faltered. "They think it's just a phase, that you'll soon move on to someone more suitable." "Suitable?" Yates repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "What exactly do they consider suitable, Eleanor?" She couldn't meet his eyes. "Someone pretty, someone who turns heads when she walks into a room, not someone plain like me." For several heartbeats, Yates was silent. Then, with unexpected gentleness, he placed his fingers beneath her chin, tilting her face up until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "Is that how you see yourself?" he asked, his blue eyes intense. "Plain?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "It's how I've always been seen." "By people who don't know how to truly look," he countered fiercely. "Eleanor, when I see you teaching your students, your face lit up with passion for knowledge. When I watch you reading poetry on this very swing, so lost in the words that you don't notice me approaching. When you laugh, really laugh, with your whole being." He shook his head, as if words were insufficient. There's nothing plain about you. You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes, but she blinked them back. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to, Yates insisted. I'm saying it because it's true. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. You know what I've been searching for all these years? Moving from town to town? Something real? Something honest? In a world full of people pretending to be something they're not, you're exactly who you are: kind, intelligent, brave. His hand moved to cup her cheek, and Eleanor found herself leaning into his touch. If the people in this town think you're plain, then plain is all I've ever wanted. The words hit Eleanor with the force of revelation. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not for what she lacked, but for everything she was. Before she could respond, Yates leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deepening as Eleanor responded. Her hands found their way to his shoulders, steadying herself against the rush of sensation that threatened to overwhelm her. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Parker, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor's heart soared at his words. I think I'm already there, she admitted, surprising herself with her boldness. Yates's answering smile was radiant. He drew her into his arms, and they remained on the porch swing until long after the stars had emerged, talking of dreams and possibilities, of futures that suddenly seemed within reach. As Saturday dawned, Eleanor felt as though she were moving through a dream. The memory of Yates's kiss, his declaration, kept a smile on her face as she went about her morning chores. They had made plans to meet again that evening. Yates had been mysterious about his intentions, saying only that he had something important to discuss with her. Eleanor was hanging laundry in her small backyard when a commotion from the street caught her attention. Raised voices, angry and insistent, disrupted the usually peaceful morning. Curiosity drew her around the side of the cottage, where she was met with a sight that stopped her cold. In the middle of the dirt road stood Beatrice Miller and her husband, the town's banker, confronting a stone-faced Yates Walker. A small crowd had already gathered to watch the unfolding drama. I won't stand for it, Mr. Miller was shouting, his face flushed with anger. You've insulted my wife, and I demand satisfaction. Yates's posture was rigid, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip, not threatening, but ready. I meant no insult, Mr. Miller. I simply stated facts. Eleanor hurried forward, heart racing. What's happening here? Beatrice turned toward her, eyes narrowed with malice. Your cowboy here thinks he can speak to respectable women however he pleases. That's not true, Yates countered calmly, though Eleanor could see the tension in his jaw. Mrs. Miller approached me at the general store, asking invasive questions about my intentions toward Miss Parker. When I declined to discuss my personal affairs, she made several disparaging remarks about Eleanor's appearance and character. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. And then, Beatrice cut in. He had the audacity to tell me that my beauty was only skin deep, while yours went all the way to your soul. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Eleanor felt a warm glow spread through her chest at Yates's defense. Mr. Miller stepped closer to Yates, jabbing a finger at his chest. No one speaks to my wife that way, Cowboy. I want you gone from Copper Creek by sundown, or there'll be consequences. A hush fell over the gathering crowd. Miller wasn't just a banker, he held the mortgages on half the businesses in town, including the Harrington Ranch. His threat carried real weight. Yates's expression remained impassive. With all due respect, Mr. Miller, I won't be leaving. Then you'll regret it, Miller snarled. I'll make sure Harrington fires you for starters. No one in this county will hire you after I'm through. Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. Mr. Miller, surely this is an overreaction to a simple misunderstanding. Miller barely spared her a glance. "Stay out of this, Miss Parker. This is between men." "It concerns me directly," Eleanor insisted, her voice stronger than she felt. "If Mrs. Miller was asking questions about me—" "Questions that needed asking?" Beatrice interjected smugly. "Someone had to find out what this drifter really wants from our town's spinster schoolteacher." The crude insinuation hung in the air, causing gasps from some onlookers. Eleanor felt her face flame with humiliation and anger. "That's enough." The new voice cut through the tension like a knife. Eleanor turned to see Mr. Harrington pushing through the crowd, his expression thunderous. "What's all this about, Miller?" Briefly, both sides stated their case, with Beatrice embellishing liberally, and Yates maintaining his composed account of events. Harrington listened, his weathered face giving away nothing. When they'd finished, he turned to Miller. "Sounds to me like your wife was poking her nose where it doesn't belong, and Walker here just defended his lady's honor." His tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. "As for threatening his job, you might hold my mortgage, Miller, but I decide who works my ranch. Walker stays." Miller's face darkened with rage. "You'll regret taking his side, Harrington, when your next payment comes due." "You'll what?" Harrington challenged. "Foreclose on one of the most productive ranches in the territory? Over a personal squabble? I think the territorial bank examiners might have something to say about that." The veiled threat wasn't lost on Miller, whose livelihood depended on the appearance of fair business practices. He sputtered, then grabbed his wife's arm. "This isn't over," he warned, before leading Beatrice away. As the crowd dispersed, murmuring excitedly about the confrontation, Yates approached Eleanor, concern etched on his features. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." Mr. Harrington clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't apologize for standing up to bullies, son." He nodded respectfully to Eleanor. "Miss Parker. Good day to you both." With that, he strode away, leaving them alone in the street. Eleanor could hardly process what had just happened. "Are you all right?" she asked Yates. His laugh was short, almost disbelieving. "I'm asking myself the same about you." Eleanor, the things she said, were nothing I haven't heard before, she finished for him. "But your defense of me? That was new." She smiled up at him, and quite gallant. Yates shook his head ruefully. "I should have just walked away. Now I've made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in town." "For me," Eleanor said softly, "you risked your position, your reputation. For me." The realization seemed to strike them both simultaneously, the significance of what had transpired. In a small frontier town, Yates had publicly chosen Eleanor over the social standing that could have eased his way. He took her hands in his, oblivious to any remaining onlookers. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Eleanor squeezed his hands, her heart too full for words. After a moment, she found her voice again. "You mentioned having something important to discuss tonight." Yates glanced around at the few lingering townsfolk, then back at Eleanor. "I had planned something more private, but—" He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Eleanor Parker, would you walk with me? There's something I need to ask you." They walked to the small church at the edge of town, its white steeple gleaming in the morning sun. The building was empty, the grounds peaceful and private. Beneath a spreading oak tree, Yates turned to face Eleanor, taking both her hands in his. "I had a whole speech prepared for tonight," he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "But after what just happened, I don't want to wait another moment." He took a deep breath. "Eleanor, I know it's too fast by most standards. We've only known each other 2 weeks. But in those 2 weeks, I've discovered more about love and belonging than in all my 30 years combined." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she began to understand where this conversation was heading. "I came to Copper Creek looking for work," Yates continued. "But I found a home instead. I found it in your smile, in your courage, in the way you see the world. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, simple ring, a band of silver with a single, modest pearl. This was my mother's. She made me promise to give it only to the woman who captured my heart completely. Sinking to one knee before her, Yates held up the ring. Eleanor Parker, I love you. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I love the way you stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. I love the person I am when I'm with you. His blue eyes shone with emotion. Will you marry me? Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as joy pure and overwhelming surged through her. Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes, Yates Walker, I will marry you. With hands that trembled slightly, Yates slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. He rose to his feet and gathered her in his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise that words could not express. When they finally parted, Eleanor laughed through her tears. What will people say? The plain schoolteacher and the handsome cowboy engaged after just 2 weeks? Yates brushed a strand of hair from her face, his expression tender. Let them talk. We know the truth. His smile turned mischievous. Besides, I have a feeling we're going to give them plenty more to gossip about in the years to come. Eleanor's answering smile was radiant. For the first time in her life, she didn't care what others thought. In Yates's eyes, she was beautiful, worthy, loved, and that was all that mattered. News of their engagement spread through Copper Creek like wildfire. By Sunday morning's church service, there wasn't a soul in town who hadn't heard. Eleanor and Yates entered the church together, her hand resting in the crook of his arm, her mother's pearl ring gleaming on her finger. The reactions were mixed, some genuinely happy for the couple, others barely concealing their shock or disapproval. Mrs. Thompson sniffed audibly as they passed her pew, while Beatrice Miller refused to meet their eyes at all. But there were also warm congratulations from the Harringtons, Sophia and her mother, and many of Eleanor's students and their families. Reverend Collins, who had baptized Eleanor as an infant and had known her all her life, announced their engagement to the congregation with genuine pleasure. It seems the Lord has blessed our community with a new union, he proclaimed from the pulpit. We rejoice with Miss Parker and Mr. Walker as they begin their journey together. After the service, as they greeted well-wishers on the church steps, Sally Harrington approached with a bouquet of wildflowers. For you, Miss Parker, she said shyly. Ma says these are traditional for brides-to-be. Eleanor accepted the flowers with a warm smile. Thank you, Sally. They're beautiful. The girl hesitated, then added, I told Becky Miller that I think you're the prettiest teacher in all of Wyoming Territory, especially when you smile. And Mr. Walker makes you smile all the time now. Touched by the child's loyalty, Eleanor crouched to embrace her. That's very kind of you, Sally. As the girl skipped away, Yates squeezed Eleanor's hand. Smart kid, he commented. She sees what I see. They had decided on a simple ceremony in early October, just 6 weeks away. The timing would allow Eleanor to begin the school year and settle her affairs while giving them enough time to prepare for the wedding before winter set in. Yates had already begun construction on an addition to Eleanor's cottage, 2 more rooms that would give them space to start their life together. The Harringtons, pleased beyond measure with Yates's work, had offered him a permanent position as foreman with a substantial increase in wages. The arrangement would provide the couple with stability, while allowing them to save toward their shared dream, a small ranch of their own someday, where Yates could raise horses and Eleanor could continue teaching, perhaps even open a small school. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy but joyful. Eleanor continued her teaching duties while planning their modest ceremony and preparing her home for married life. Yates divided his time between the Harrington Ranch and working on their cottage, often arriving at Eleanor's door covered in sawdust, but beaming with pride at his progress. They faced challenges, of course. Miller, true to his word, made things difficult where he could refusing Yates credit at stores, where he held influence, spreading subtle rumors about his past, questioning his intentions. But for every door Miller closed, the community seemed to open another. Merchants offered fair prices for cash, neighbors contributed labor to the cottage expansion, and slowly, the tide of public opinion turned in their favor. It helped that Yates proved himself an invaluable asset to the Harrington Ranch, introducing innovative techniques he'd learned in his travels that increased productivity and profit. It also didn't hurt that he had a natural charm that won over even the most skeptical townsfolk, or that anyone with eyes could see how deeply he adored Eleanor. For her part, Eleanor blossomed under Yates's love. She stood taller, spoke more confidently, laughed more freely. The woman who had once tried to make herself invisible now walked through town with her head high, returning curious stares with serene smiles. She even found the courage to submit one of her children's stories to a publisher in Denver, encouraged by Yates's unwavering belief in her talent. 3 days before the wedding, Eleanor was arranging books in her classroom when a tentative knock sounded at the door. She looked up to find Beatrice Miller standing in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Mrs. Miller?" Eleanor greeted her cautiously. "What can I do for you?" Beatrice twisted her gloved hands nervously. "May I come in?" Eleanor nodded, setting aside the primer she'd been holding. "Of course." The woman entered, glancing around the schoolroom as if seeing it for the first time. "I've come to apologize," she said abruptly. Of all the things Eleanor might have expected, an apology wasn't among them. "I beg your pardon?" "For the things I said. About you. For years, really, but especially recently." Beatrice met her eyes with visible effort. It was unkind and undeserved. Eleanor studied her warily. "May I ask what prompted this change of heart?" A flush crept up Beatrice's neck. "My daughter, Mary. She's only 7, but—" She sighed heavily. "Yesterday, I overheard her telling her friend that she didn't want to play with Sarah Jenkins because she's too plain. When I asked what she meant, she said that pretty girls shouldn't have to play with plain ones." Her voice cracked slightly. "She was repeating things she'd heard me say about you." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. "I was horrified," Beatrice continued. "Is that the legacy I want to leave my daughter? Teaching her to judge others based on appearances?" She shook her head. "I spent all night thinking about the kind of woman I want Mary to become, and I realized I'd rather she grow up to be like you than like me." Eleanor was momentarily speechless. "Mrs. Miller, Please," the woman interrupted. "Let me finish. My husband and we've not been happy for some time. I think I became bitter, jealous of anyone who found joy where I couldn't." She smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture. "When I saw how that cowboy Mr. Walker looked at you, something ugly took root in me. I couldn't understand why he'd choose you when he could have had—" She gestured vaguely. "Someone beautiful," Eleanor supplied quietly. Beatrice nodded, shame evident in her expression. "But watching you these past weeks, seeing how you've handled the gossip, the unkindness, you've shown more grace and dignity than I could ever hope to possess." She drew a deep breath. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Miss Parker. I just wanted you to know that I regret my behavior, and I wish you happiness in your marriage." Eleanor considered the woman before her, a woman who had caused her pain for years, but was now offering what seemed to be a sincere apology. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. That means more than you might imagine." Relief flooded Beatrice's features. "I'll leave you to your preparations, then." She turned to go, then hesitated. "And Miss Parker? You'll make a beautiful bride." After she'd gone, Eleanor sat for a long while, processing the unexpected encounter. It wasn't complete reconciliation, nor did it erase years of hurtful words. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall of judgment that had surrounded her for so long. That evening, as she recounted the conversation to Yates on their porch swing, he listened with thoughtful attention. "Do you think she meant it?" he asked when she'd finished. Eleanor considered the question. "Yes, I believe she did. People can surprise you." Yates smiled, pulling her closer against his side. "Like a plain schoolteacher surprising a drifting cowboy by becoming his whole world?" Eleanor laughed, nestling into his embrace. "Exactly like that." Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October air crisp with the promise of autumn. The ceremony was held in the town church, decorated simply with autumn leaves and wildflowers gathered by Eleanor's students. Nearly the entire town turned out for the occasion, some out of genuine goodwill, others perhaps from curiosity, but all contributing to the sense that this union was being embraced by the community. Eleanor wore a dress of cream-colored silk, modest yet elegant, with her mother's lace veil and pearl pins in her hair. Sophia served as her maid of honor, while Mr. Harrington stood as Yates's best man. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. Reverend Collins beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife. As Yates leaned down to seal their vows with a kiss, he whispered words meant only for Eleanor. "You are everything I never knew I was searching for." The celebration afterward was held in the town square, with tables laden with food contributed by neighbors and friends. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts, the festive atmosphere continuing well into the evening. Even Mr. Miller made an appearance, offering a stiff but civil congratulation to the couple. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the square, Yates led Eleanor away from the celebration toward their cottage, their home now, with its new rooms waiting to be filled with memories. They walked slowly, savoring the moment, their hands intertwined. "Mrs. Walker," Yates said, testing the name on his tongue, "has a nice ring to it." Eleanor smiled up at him. "It certainly does, Mr. Walker." When they reached their gate, Yates surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "I believe this is traditional," he explained with a grin, carrying her across the threshold into their home. Inside, Eleanor was met with another surprise. On the small table by the window sat a stack of envelopes tied with ribbon. "What's this?" she asked as Yates set her gently on her feet. "Open it and see," he urged, his expression expectant. Eleanor untied the ribbon and opened the first envelope. Inside was a letter from a publishing house in Denver. She scanned it quickly, her eyes widening as she read. "They want to publish my children's story," she whispered incredulously. "They're offering a contract for a series." Yates's smile was radiant. "I told you they would. You're too talented to be ignored." "But how did you know? The letter is dated yesterday." She looked up at him, understanding dawning. "You rode to town to collect the mail." He nodded. "Wanted to make sure our wedding day was perfect in every way." Eleanor launched herself into his arms, laughing through happy tears. "It is perfect. You are perfect." Yates held her close, his voice soft against her hair. "Not perfect, Eleanor, just perfectly matched to you." As twilight deepened into night, they stood together in their home, surrounded by the promise of their future, a future neither could have imagined just weeks before. For a plain schoolteacher and a drifting cowboy had found in each other what the world had told them they didn't deserve: a love that saw beyond appearances to the truth of the heart. 10 years later, the classroom buzzed with the excited energy of children eager for dismissal on the last day before Christmas break. Eleanor Walker stood at the front, watching with amusement as her students fidgeted in their seats, their attention clearly no longer on the geography lesson she'd been attempting to teach. "All right," she relented with a smile. "I can see that the mountains of South America are no match for thoughts of Christmas presents and sledding. Class dismissed. But don't forget your holiday reading assignments. The children erupted from their seats, gathering books and wrapping scarves with chaotic enthusiasm. Eleanor accepted hugs and Christmas wishes, along with small handmade gifts that she treasured far more than anything store-bought. As the last student departed, Eleanor began tidying her classroom, in the small but sturdy schoolhouse that stood on the eastern edge of the Walker Ranch. The building, constructed 5 years earlier, represented the fulfillment of one of their shared dreams, a place where Eleanor could continue teaching while remaining close to home and family. Through the window, she could see the main house far grander than her original cottage, though still modest by some standards. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and even at this distance, she could make out the Christmas wreath hanging on the front door, crafted by their eldest daughter. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. She smiled at the sight of Yates riding toward the schoolhouse, their 4-year-old son Timothy perched proudly in front of him on the saddle. At 8, their daughter Margaret was already at an age where she insisted on riding her own pony, and she trotted alongside her father, her dark braids bouncing with each step of her mount. Eleanor gathered her shawl and books, locking the schoolhouse behind her as she stepped out to meet her family. The years had been kind to Yates, a few strands of silver now threaded through his hair, and the lines at the corners of his eyes had deepened, but he was still the most handsome man Eleanor had ever known. More importantly, he still looked at her with the same wonder and love that had captured her heart a decade ago. "There's my favorite teacher," he called, dismounting with the same easy grace he'd always possessed. He lifted Timothy down, and the boy immediately ran to his mother, wrapping his arms around her legs. "Mama, Papa let me help feed the new foals today," he announced proudly. Eleanor bent to embrace him, her heart swelling with love for this energetic boy who looked so much like his father. "Did you now? What a big responsibility." Margaret approached at a more dignified pace, though her excitement was evident in her bright eyes. "Eleanor's eyes," everyone said. "And I helped deliver Mrs. Jenkins's Christmas packages," she reported. "Papa said I was the best assistant he could ask for." "I'm sure you were," Eleanor agreed, smoothing a hand over her daughter's hair. Yates stepped close, planting a kiss on Eleanor's cheek. After 10 years, the gesture still sent warmth spreading through her. "How was the last day?" he asked, taking her books from her arms. "Chaotic," she admitted with a laugh. "I'm not sure anyone learned a thing about South American geography, but there was plenty of holiday spirit." They walked together toward the main house, the children running ahead, eager to check on the Christmas preparations. Eleanor and Yates followed more slowly, his free hand finding hers, as it always did. "Copper Creek was busy today," he commented. "Ran into Beatrice Miller in town. She mentioned they received another letter from Mary at that women's college back east." "Oh? How is she doing?" "Apparently thriving." Beatrice couldn't stop talking about her daughter, the scholar. Yates squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Seems young Mary has grown into quite the advocate for women's education. Reminded me of someone else I know." Eleanor smiled at the comparison. Mary Miller, once a shy child repeating her mother's unkind words, had indeed grown into a remarkable young woman due in no small part, Eleanor liked to think, to the changes in her mother's attitudes over the years. Beatrice, though never a close friend, had become an ally in many community matters, particularly those involving the education of girls. The new families from the Eastern settlement sent word they'll attend Christmas services in town, Yates continued. "I told them they're welcome to stop by afterward if they'd like. Thought it might make them feel more welcome?" "Of course," Eleanor nodded. The influx of settlers to the area over the past few years had changed the landscape of their community, bringing both challenges and opportunities. "I'll make sure we have extra food prepared." They reached the house, climbing the steps to the wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides, a feature Yates had insisted on when they built, knowing how much Eleanor loved to sit outside with a book during the warmer months. Inside, the aroma of pine and cinnamon greeted them. The main room was cheerfully decorated for Christmas, with greenery adorning the mantel and a tree waiting to be trimmed in the corner. 8-year-old Margaret was already sorting through a box of ornaments, while Timothy chattered excitedly to his older brother, 7-year-old James, who had stayed home with their housekeeper, Mrs. Gonzalez, due to a mild cold. The scene was one of such domestic contentment that Eleanor paused in the doorway, momentarily overwhelmed by gratitude. From the lonely schoolteacher mocked for her plainness to this, a home filled with love, children, purpose. A life beyond anything she had dared to imagine for herself. Yates noticed her hesitation, his arm slipping around her waist. "What is it, love?" Eleanor shook her head, smiling through sudden tears. "Just happy. So very happy." He drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "As am I. Every single day." Later that evening, after the children had been tucked into bed with promises that Christmas was indeed coming soon, Eleanor and Yates sat before the fire in the quiet house. Her head rested against his shoulder as she read aloud from the latest letter from her publisher news that her 10th children's book would be released in the spring. The adventures of Plain Jane and her cowboy friend continue to delight children across the country, she read. We anticipate this newest installment will be our most successful yet. Yates chuckled. Plain Jane. Still can't believe that's the character children have fallen in love with. Children recognize truth when they see it, Eleanor replied, setting the letter aside. A plain girl can have extraordinary adventures and find extraordinary love. There's that word again, Yates mused, his fingers playing idly with a strand of her hair still brown, though with its own threads of silver now. Plain. After all these years, I still don't understand it when applied to you. Eleanor turned to face him fully. No? He shook his head, his expression serious despite the warmth in his eyes. The woman who built a school from nothing? Who writes stories that children across the country treasure? Who raised 3 incredible children while helping me build a ranch that's the envy of the territory? His hand cradled her cheek tenderly. The woman who saved a drifting cowboy by giving him a home in her heart? There's nothing plain about her. There never was. Eleanor leaned into his touch, overwhelmed as always by the way he saw her truly saw her. I love you, Yates Walker. More with each passing day. And I love you, Eleanor Walker, he replied, drawing her closer. Plain was all I ever wanted because plain to me meant real, honest, true. His lips found hers in a kiss as sweet and passionate as their first. And loving you has been the truest thing I've ever known. As the fire crackled and snow began to fall gently outside their window, Eleanor nestled in her husband's embrace, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest adventures, the deepest loves, come to those the world overlooks, to those with the courage to see beyond appearances to the beauty of the heart within. In the quiet of their home, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Eleanor and Yates Walker held each other close, 2 souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it most. Not a fairy tale, but something far better. A love story written not in grand gestures or perfect features, but in daily kindnesses, shared dreams, and the enduring belief that true beauty is never plain at all.